dealing with the issue of where it all came from. We want to talk about similarities. Why are living creatures similar? You may talk. This is just for us to have fun with. Why are living creatures similar? Does that mean they're related? As the evolutionists suppose, because you have a mouth and Gail the gorilla has a mouth, does that mean that we're related? Why are living things similar? And then why are they so different? Because not only do we have similarities, we have great differences between ourselves and the ape-like creatures. Why are there similarities? Why are there differences? And there's some other important issues that we could deal with. The fossil record is an important issue. How can we explain what's found in the fossil record? But we're not going to get into the fossils. We're going to look mostly today at why living creatures are similar and why they are different. Now, in the biblical record, we have a creation account described, and day by day the creation activities of God are laid out in a fashion that's easy for us to understand. First day, second day, third day, fourth day, fifth day. So we know God is the creator, and He created on specific days. Realizing the Bible is true, if we accept that as the very basis for what we believe, we should expect to find it supported when we study science. Because science is simply the study of how God is working. In the Bible, God tells us how He works or what He's doing. And when we look into modern science, we study what God is doing. We expect to see Him doing what He says He's doing. And actually, that's what we will observe in science. Why are living creatures so similar? Gary? Because why are living creatures so similar? Why is the Gail the gorilla similar to me? He has hands like I have, somewhat like it, not exactly, they're differences in the structure, but they're somewhat like it, and he has a mouth and eyes. Why the similarities? You like bananas? So do I. Who does not like bananas in the class? Do you think they're less monkey-like because they don't like bananas? If the argument of similarity is that those things that are most similar are related through some ancestor, if that's really true, then you people who like bananas are more like the ape than those who don't like bananas. Actually, there's a good explanation for similarities, and it's similar to what we find with automobiles. These two cars are similar. It's a Rolls-Royce, it's a Volkswagen. And they're similar. They both have headlights. They're similar. They both have wheels. They're similar. They both have steering wheels. They both have internal combustion gasoline engines, so they can run around the road. And why are they similar? Does similarity mean that one kind of car will turn into another kind of car and they're related in some kind of ancestral relationship? No. If we look more carefully at the automobiles, we must realize they're similar because there's a designer who designed them to share the road. Whoever designed the automobiles wanted people to see at night, so they put headlights in the front. That's a good idea. Otherwise, you couldn't drive in the dark. And they wanted them to run around the road, so they put wheels on them. That's a good idea. Otherwise, you couldn't move rapidly along the road. And then you've got to have something to turn fuel into energy, so they put internal combustion engines in them. Now, this is in the back, this is in the front, but the engines are very similar. Now, if we believe that similarities mean one will turn into the other, then we'd all go out and buy a Volkswagen, put them in our garages, let them set a few years, and then they'd turn into Rolls Royces. So similarities don't mean necessarily that one is related to another. Now I look at you and I've seen some of your parents. And I saw your parents, Tanya, saw your mom, and she looks sort of like you, and that means you're related. So similarity sometimes means relationships, but when we're talking about different kinds of things, there's nothing to indicate that similarity means relationships. Rather, similarities are like between the automobiles. They indicate there's a designer who designed us to share the food. If there weren't similarities, then we couldn't share the food. If the gorilla is going to eat a banana, it's got to have a mouth. How would you like to be a gorilla? And God forgot to give you a mouth. You never thought about it. So how are you going to eat? And you'll take it through your stomach or whatever. How are you going to eat? You can't. So God gave the gorilla a mouth like you have, because He wanted us to share the food. Just like automobiles have similarities because they share the fuel. They share gasoline. And we design them so they're similar and can use the same kinds of gasoline. Well, God had enough sense to do that as well. He's a lot more wise than we are, and so He created His creatures so that they can share the food with us, and we can all eat the same type of food. Now, from the chemical standpoint, if you're going to eat the same kinds of food, then you have to have the same kinds of digestive enzymes and the same kind of, basically, the same kinds of chemicals inside your body to process the food. It's like the engine and the automobile. They're similar because they're using the same kind of fuel or food for their energy. And that means there's a designer who designed them to share the fuel. Likewise, there's a designer who designed us to share the fuel. So, similarities do not necessarily mean ancestral relationships. Similarities give an indication there is a designer who designed us to share the fuel. And God wanted the gorilla to see just like He wants you to see it. All the larger creatures, God gave eyes to them so they could see where they're going. Now, some of the smaller creatures may not need eyes, but the larger creatures needed eyes so they wouldn't bump into the trees. How would you like to be bold with a gorilla and you're swinging through the trees and God forgot to give you eyes? Smash right into a tree. Another casualty, right? No, God gave Bodo the gorilla eyes also. You can talk. Got a question? That's it. All right, that's one of the answers to the lab assignment. Why are there similarities in living creatures? There are similarities because there's a designer who designed us to share the earth. If we're going to stand up and walk, we better have muscles that can move our frame. We need a frame to hold us up. Just like horses have a frame, and apes have a frame, and they're a bone kind of structure. That doesn't mean we're related. It means the designer wanted us to be able to stand up and to move the frame around. That's common sense. Because this has wheels and this has wheels does not mean this will turn into this. And because this has legs and I have legs doesn't mean that this will turn into this. No matter what you think. This doesn't turn into this. I was born just like you all are born. God created apes, God created man, and the separate kinds of creatures. Similarities indicate that there is a common designer. Now, in addition to similarities, we have something that pretty well demonstrates evolution is not true. And fits into the creation model of origin, we can explain the differences. Not only can we explain similarities, we can explain differences. If evolution is true and similarities mean one kind of creature will turn into another kind of creature, then why do we have the distinct barriers between the gorilla and man? I mean, there are such significant differences between us that there's no kind of bridge that leaps between the gorilla and man. Nothing in the fossil record, nothing in modern living things is half man and half ape or bridges the gap between us. Even in the fossil record, those fossils that have been claimed to be missing links have typically been exposed as hoaxes. Or the modern one, Lucy, by Donald Johanson, that was recently discovered, he claims that it's a missing link between man and ape, and he found a skull is an Australopithecus, which is a type of southern ape, and there's no indication it is any kind of missing link at all. All we found in Africa is what you would expect to find in Africa, ape skull. But why are there differences? We know now that the similarities can refer to ancestral relationship, like Tanya and her mother, or some of you whose parents I've seen, you look similar to your parents. The similarities can indicate ancestral relationships. They can also indicate a common designer. And we have similarities in living creatures, but something more to point us to a common designer. We have such great differences between us that there's no indication one kind of thing can, through an ancestral relationship, turn into another kind of thing. Whenever we have any kind, known kind of animal reproducing, they bring forth the same kind. Now that's a principle we find in the Bible as well in Genesis chapter 1. Living creatures reproduce after their own kind. You recall, that's a basic biological principle. It's also found in Genesis chapter 1. Living creatures reproduce after their own kind. One kind of creature cannot turn into a completely different kind of creature. So, in all the breeding experiments with cattle, and records have been kept for years and years, for decades, and all the breeding experiments, even beyond that, hundreds of years, cattle records have been kept, and all we get from cattle are cattle. We don't get any horses, we don't get any pigs, don't get any gorillas, don't get anything but cattle. Various varieties, various types of cattle, yes, so there is the ability to vary, but they're all cattle. Same thing's true of the horses. And all the breeding experiments with horses, through the same genetic horse breeding pool we can produce a large Clydesdale stallion, or some of the miniature stallions that are being bred in Australia that pull the funeral hearses with dogs, or that are used for show purposes and circuses and things of that sort. But you always get a horse from a horse. You never get a dog. It's the smallest of dogs, but you never get a dog. It's a horse, and it has all the capabilities and functions of a horse. It's just very small. And has the same genetic makeup. It's just that we have selectively bred them to bring out a small size within the horse. But they're still horses. Variety, yes. But evolution from one kind of creature into a completely different kind of creature, no. Now, recognizing this problem, modern evolutionists have proposed a new view. Recognizing that the differences are so great that nothing seems to bridge the gap between them, no slow process of evolution between ape and man, or between the amphibian and the mammal. Nothing really that's halfway between, if it's got a frog's head and a cow's legs, or anything of that sort. Since there's nothing like that, another view that's been proposed by modern evolutionists is called punctuated equilibria. Here's what they're saying. Some of you remember Mama Lizard walking through the forest? You remember what happens to Mama Lizard as she walks through the forest? What? The modern evolution says something happens to punctuate her equilibrium. Or she gets bombarded by... Are you okay? Open the window, let the smoke out. She gets bombarded by cosmic radiation or some kind of mutagenic agent. We're always being bombarded by cosmic radiation. Something bombards her. It causes a change in her genes. This is a DNA molecule model. And it gets bombarded with radiation. And if you bombard her body with radiation, you will affect some of her reproductive genes. So that some change occurs, the evolutionists say. And the change is so magnificent, it's so great, that when Mama Lizard lays her eggs, first egg hatches, and out comes another little lizard. Right? Just like Mama. Out comes another little lizard. And on it goes, and all the eggs hatch, get back in the nest there. Finally, the last egg hatches, and out comes a bird, and it flies away. That's called the hopeful monster theory. It's a relatively newer view of the evolution. Since there's nothing to indicate one kind of creature can gradually and slowly change into another kind of creature, the idea is one day Gordo the gorilla or some ancestor got bombarded with radiation. And as Gordo the gorilla got bombarded with radiation, you sit down. Just sit down. He's very handsome. So we don't need to focus in on the Rodney as he sits down. Rodney, did you hear down the hall? You understand what's happening? Gordo the gorilla gets bombarded with radiation. And the evolutionists claim that causes him to turn into a completely different kind of creature. That's why it's called the hopeful monster theory. Well, let's go back to the bird, the origination of the bird. If this is really true, and Mama Lizard looked back in her nest and saw a funny-looking creature like this that came out of her eggs, what do you think she'd do? And Mama Lizard said, "Look at that wonderful morsel, and there it is." And that's the end of the hopeful monster. The hopeful monster theory really won't work. Actually, God's protected us from monstrosities. When something is damaged by radiation, however it happens, I think it's the last one. Woo! That was loaded, wasn't it? That's a little too much in that one. But anyway. There's a fire. Did you see that? That's right. Woo! Mama Lizard got bombarded by radiation. Here's what's going to happen. God has protected us, so whenever the genes, that's it. I think I got them all. Yeah, there's one left. That's it, no more. All right, it's bombarded by radiation. The genes get altered so that some defect occurs in whatever is born, and that defect will stop it from functioning properly, and it will, if it's very, very significant, it'll die. If you start bombarding your genes with radiation, don't expect to be improved. We don't want to get x-rays for our bodies, right? Unless we have to. We don't want atomic bombs blowing up and exposing us to radiation, because it's harmful. We know of no beneficial change that resulted from the bombs, atomic bombs, and all the radiation from Hiroshima and Nagasaki. No evolution there. No, things were harmed by radiation. So the hopeful monster theory is just that. The modern evolution concept of punctuated equilibria, where Mama Lizard gets her equilibrium so punctuated, so messed up, that a monster is born. She calls it a monster. The hopeful monster. And really it is just a hopeful monster theory, this modern concept in evolution. It's just a hope. It's just really a blind faith. We don't have anything actually to support belief in this concept that one kind of creature can evolve or change through any mechanism or means into another completely different kind of creature. Now, why are living creatures similar? There's a creator who created us to share the earth. Why are they different? There's a creator who made them distinguishingly different, such that one kind can never turn into another kind, and as a result, we can study them, we can subdue them, learn about them for the benefit of man and for the glory of God, and we won't have any of the wild science fiction monsters about which we can know nothing. God has given us a guideline for searching out and learning about the universe. And He tells us to subdue it and learn about it for the benefit of man and the glory of God. Any questions? Any questions? Any questions about the lab? What? All right. You can come up and get it. Smile when you come up, please. Yeah. Did I what? All right, now, you can ask any question about the lab. Is there anything you don't understand? All right, read the last question to me. Read the last question. All right, the last question. What page is it? 40. All right. Quiet. Page 40. Almost all mammals of Australia belong to the order Marsupial. That's pouched mammals such as the kangaroo and the koala. Evolutionists generally believe that these are lower animals. All right, quiet. Listen. These are lower animals, the evolutionists say, because the reproduction does not involve a placenta, which is considered by them to be a complex structure. Some evolutionists claim that there is no environmental pressure upon these marsupial mammals to develop into other forms. Because of these pouched mammals live in Australia. Now, what arguments can we give against the evolutionary concept that these are of a lower form? Well, first, they're not just in Australia. We have similar creatures in this area. When I was a boy, I went hunting back on my uncle's farm. It was after midnight. We went out when it was dark, and he had a good hunting dog. We went out way back on the farm there into the valley area back between two hills in Kentucky. And back in that area with these flashlights, and we had a big bag, and we were possum hunting. And we were back, and up in the tree, the dog was the one who found it, because he had a good dog, a good hunting dog. And that dog spots the possum, smells around, and knows that possum's in the tree, has the possum tree, and is down there barking, and we come down with the lights running through that dark wooded area, shine the light from the tree, and sure enough, there's this possum. And he climbed up in the tree and shook the possum down, and the possum lays dead. If you know anything about possums, when they're attacked or they're threatened, they just flop over like they're dead. And they pretend like they're dead, thinking you'll leave them alone. What's that? What we wanted to do, we grabbed the possum by the tail, stick him in the bag, bring him back to the house. We pulled the possum out of the bag, and he grabs its head so it won't bite. It was a pretty good size. It was a full-grown mama possum. He grabs the head, and he said, "Look at this. She's got babies in her pouch." So we opened up the pouch and looked in there, and sure enough, these little tiny possums in there. It was we turned her loose. We didn't eat her or kill her or anything. We turned her loose because she had all these little babies. We wanted them to grow up back there in the woods. All right. The possum is a North American marsupial, and it doesn't show any kind of indication it's going to evolve into any other type of creature. It's actually not a lower kind of animal anyway. It's a highly complex creature, so the evolutionists are wrong in identifying it as a lower form of life or a lower animal. It's a highly complex animal. The answer is, first, it's not a lower form of life. It's a highly complex creature itself. And it simply has a different type of reproduction than those creatures that involve a placenta. A placenta mammal placed in Australia, like the rabbit, thrives and may even replace the marsupial mammal in that ecosystem, so that there's no indication that the possum or the rabbit are a lower form of life. And if evolution was occurring, supposedly those with a placenta, if the evolutionists are right, should survive more readily, but that's not true. So if the survival of the fittest was the only mechanism that controlled the development or evolution of different kinds of things, if that were really true, then the rabbit shouldn't survive where other creatures that have a placenta survive. The placenta, now rabbit, has a placenta. Placenta mammal, a rabbit is. Any questions further about that? Let me give you here's what I wrote down. A placenta mammal placed in Australia, such as the rabbit in your text, may thrive and even replace a marsupial mammal in the ecosystem. However, its survival does not show that the placental mammals are more advanced. It's often the lack of natural enemies that cause them to multiply, not an organism's superiority, as the evolutionists propose. In the same way, the gypsy moth in North America competes successfully with native insects for a niche in the ecosystem, but its success does not prove that the gypsy moth is superior to other insects. The fact that it's alive is no indication of superiority. It's simply an indication that they fit into the ecosystem, and God has a place for different kinds of living creatures. There's nothing to indicate that we can properly call these lower forms of life. They are complex forms of life that are different. Yes. The lack of enemies causes it to be successful in its environment. Not whatever creature we're talking about. It's not an indication that if it had a placenta or didn't have a placenta, that's not the indicator of whether or not it will be successful in life and be able to multiply abundantly. It's able to multiply if it doesn't have enemies that kill it. There's a reason for its rapid multiplying or growth.